This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
I love everything about this restaurant. It really is my happy place. And, everything from this very genuine group of people that I work with that absolutely love hospitality, like in a true sense. Being around a group of people like that is really important and quite impactful for me.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. What is the perfect restaurant model? From the outside looking in, being the best in your field may help explain this, but with so many moving parts to a restaurant, the slim profit margins and the balancing act of juggling consumer expectation, what is a sweet spot for a quality offering? Sunny Lussard is the co-owner of Woodcut restaurant in Sydney. Sunny, how are you?
I'm really well, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. It's great to get you on the show. You opened Woodcut restaurant during pretty prickly time in our lives. What's it been like?
Look, it's been, it's been an incredible time, actually. I have to say, there was quite a lead up for us, so we had sort of a lot of time to prepare. And I guess we'd been actually dreaming about it for a very long time. We'd been working on the concept for actually a decade or so. And it sort of had, lots of, evolution from the time that we first wanted to, open this restaurant through to where it's sort of, turned into today. But look, it was a very interesting time because it was between two lockdowns. And I guess after the first lockdown, we assumed that was done. And so sort of launched into the opening, and it was a very exciting time for us. I think having run a very intimate fine diner and then, opening quite a large venue, I think me in particular, I was really conscious about how our regular guests at the Bridge Room and our Sydney following in particular, how they would respond to, our next chapter. So for me, that was the thing, to be honest, that I was most conscious of, and how that would be, because that was, the relationships that we had with all of those guests was so important to us. So I think that was one of the most important elements. And so having them come along and love this and embrace this next chapter and connect with what we were doing, I think that was the most sort of pivotal moment, I think, for me in that opening, knowing that we had nailed that for those guests. So everything else felt like, it just came together really beautifully once I knew that was landed.
You're right. There's enough things to deal with when you own a restaurant, let alone managing that perception from one venue to the next that are so different. Give us a sense of the scale of Woodcut, because as you say, the Bridge Room, that intimate fine diner, which kind of changed Sydney and was part of that big change. Give us a sense of Woodcut and what you're doing there.
Well, Woodcut is almost 5 times the size of the Bridge Room, and has lots of different layers to it. Yeah, so from a layout perspective, literally, I think spatially it's sort of quite substantially larger. But one of the beauties of the site, and one of the important elements that we took into consideration when we were designing it, was that we've actually laid it out into a lot of intimate areas. So in fact, when you dine at Woodcut, there are a number of smaller dining rooms which almost feel like an intimate space in themselves. So you can still have that feeling and that beautiful connection with people, and they don't feel like they're in some sort of giant venue. But in actual fact, as you look through the open kitchens and look across, you can see there's actually a lot going on, but your individual experience is quite intimate. So that was sort of a really important design element for us. We've got a terrace, a beautiful large terrace, which, goes out onto the harbour and a lovely outdoor bar. And inside, we've got a series of intimate dining rooms that sit between a series of open kitchens. And we've also got a couple of beautiful private rooms as well. So there's lots of different elements which punctuate the space. And I think that is extremely important because in itself, it's about 1,000 square metres, so it's quite large.
Wow, that's quite extraordinary. Such a huge project. What sort of people power does it take to run a restaurant that big?
Yeah, well, that's sort of another interesting one. So we've got almost 150 people working for us. So, it's an enormous team, and again, dramatically different size to the Bridge Room. But I guess, my background is in hotels. I was a hotelier for, I guess, the first 25 years of my career. And so most of my teams, and I was mostly running boutique hotels for a lot of my career. So most of my teams were sort of somewhere between 100 to 300 people. So actually, in many respects, that is my sweet spot in terms of team size. I think it allows us to have a lot of really talented, incredible managers who can flourish in themselves and also contribute to the whole kind of evolution of what we're doing, which I love. I think that's a really huge part of my satisfaction and how I love to work. I don't really want to be the one, directing every single element. I like to work with a band of talented people and, brainstorm and be inspired by each other. And I feed off that very, very much. So I love that dynamic, and it's one of the elements about Woodcut that gives me so much joy personally.
Well, I want to explore Woodcut in a bit more detail, and also the dynamic between you and Ross and how you managed to pull together these incredible venues. But take us back to when you were young. What sort of role did food play in your family growing up?
Well, it was enormously important. I mean, I've always loved food as a child. I didn't ever think it was going to, come into my world professionally. That sort of was quite a surprise, to be honest. I wanted to be, a professional pianist for most of my life, and at some point I wanted to be a pilot. My goals were dramatically different, but my childhood definitely set the stage for my passion for food. And both my parents were very much into food. My father had grown up in the countryside in England, and had grown up through the Depression, and where you've got to have your own, garden, otherwise you really don't have food to eat. So he was actually quite an accomplished gardener, and, knew how to pickle and preserve. And in fact, even he told me, I didn't even know this until recently, but when he was a really young child, he didn't even have a fridge. So he was extremely skilled in preserving food. So he sort of had a real passion for, we would drive down to Robertson and buy a box of potatoes and do something with that, or we would drive up to the Blue Mountains and, go to Bilpin and get some apples. He was sort of very much of that, ilk of go and buy a lot of something great and then do something with it. So we would always have different sort of, something fresh, and then we would, pickle or preserve or, do something with that. So if we had a crop, we would do the same thing, have baby new potatoes, but then, obviously we would do things sort of with the older, larger ones as we stored them. So I sort of had that in my house from a very young age, and my mother had a real passion actually for, nutrition, in fact. And I think that's probably not exciting for a lot of people, but actually they paid so much attention to the balance of everything. And we had a lot of friends from different parts of the world. My father's a writer, and he'd often have translators coming over and live here. And, so we would often have recipes, like I grew up with Korean recipes in my house and Greek recipes and things like that. My mum was sort of always making friends with all of our grocers around town. So, our greengrocer used to share his secret mother's Lebanese recipes. So, we had all these incredible influences in food in our house through all these people in our lives. And we travelled a lot because Dad was from the UK and would head back every year to, make sure that his family were sort of set up and looked after, and would go and, repair things for the house or, top up the garden or do things like that. And then we would sort of take side trips, and he often got posted, in an academic role, somewhere else in the world. So, we travelled a lot, and I think that was also sort of, I think, one of the greatest gifts of my life, because I had this perception that there's this whole incredible world out there. And I think growing up in a really multicultural city was extremely exciting for me. My mum was born in Lismore and had never eaten sort of any other cuisine until she moved to Sydney. So I think for her, it was also this incredible eye-opener and such a sort of an exciting world out there. So the three of us, when I was a kid, we used to sort of dine out several times a week, mostly in Chinatown and little hole-in-the-wall places. And it was a really lovely experience to grow up with, because it gave me this sense of being part of the world, being part of something bigger, and that was deeply influential for me, I think. So, yeah.
Was that upbringing the lure for you to embark on a career in sort of boutique hotels?
Look, full disclosure, I think my entry into hospitality was a complete accident. My parents, honestly, it was. And my parents, and maybe it's been like this for a lot of people, but it wasn't. Food was a hobby and a love for me. It was certainly not something that was ever going to be a professional, situation for me at all. But, I took a summer job just between some university holidays, and it was the very first job I'd ever had. My parents were sort of, again, all my friends got to have jobs when they were growing up, and I thought that was very exciting. And but they were just like, look, no, we really want you to, either study and do your work or just go out and have fun and live life. And because, this is the time when you can just sort of, have that level of freedom and focus, and there'll be a time where, you've got a lot of responsibilities. So just, do that, which at the time I was a bit frustrated with, because, they were all getting what I saw as quite important life skills. So I was petrified I was never going to be employable. And I applied for three summer jobs and got all three. One was at a florist, one was at a bank, and the other was in a hotel. And, so I took the hotel job because they paid penalty rates because you got to work in the evenings. And so I thought, I'll earn a bit more money. So my motivations were purely financial at that moment. And it was an instant love affair from day one. I loved it so much that my intent on having a summer job turned into a full-time forever job. So I literally started in hotels that day and didn't stop until 25 years later when I, Ross and I opened our first restaurant together. So it really was a complete love affair from the very beginning, and turned into, a lifelong passion. I'm still passionate about the hotel business, about hospitality, restaurants. There's two different kind of forks in the road, I guess, in that. And so what a happy accident that was.
Well, very fortunate one for everyone who loves dining out and traveling. Tell us about the really sort of important moments, before the world in restaurants, when you were sort of traveling the world and working in boutique hotels. What were some of the key venues and experiences that you had that helped sort of shape your career?
Look, I think, I had two really enormously different chapters in my hotel life, two distinctly different hotel groups that I worked with. The first was Hyatt International, and I worked at Park Hyatt Sydney for years, and that's actually where Ross and I met. And that was an incredible experience. And I think I was, surrounded by, I worked there for a long time, and I guess learnt my craft. I learnt sort of how to really understand deep hospitality and how personalised it could be, and it really, I love that hotel so much because I was able to really focus on all the guest experiences, and that really sort of spoke to me quite deeply. It was only about 150 rooms, so quite boutique in the Hyatt world. And, I worked with a really great person that just was willing to support me spreading my wings. They really let me go off and do these projects, even when it was going to be inconvenient to them and to the operation. They were willing to make their life difficult to give me opportunities. And I can't tell you how pivotal that was in my life, because I think that's also really formed the basis for how I like to operate. And whenever there is an opportunity for someone, I'll never stand in their way because it's inconvenient, because, things are always inconvenient to not have someone around. But that sort of pay it forward mentality has really stuck with me, because you've just got to get behind people and let them have their wings and their opportunities when they come along. And one of the things I've noticed is, sometimes owning a small business, sometimes you don't always have those instant opportunities for people to spread their wings. And, if there's been opportunities elsewhere and people have needed to do that, we've said, okay, who do you want us to call? Do you want to be in Melbourne? Do you want to be in Sydney? Do you want to go to Paris? Do you want to go to the US? What do you want? Let's make a phone call and let's get you that opportunity so that you can spread your wings. And often those people then come back, into another role and a more senior role later on. So I think, for me, when I was in that role at Hyatt, I got a wonderful opportunity to travel internationally, doing projects in Mexico and South America, and I ended up transferring over to a role based out of the corporate office in Chicago, where I was literally living on a plane, and every 6 weeks I was in a different country all around the world. And Ross moved over to Singapore, so he was based in Singapore. And every 6 weeks I would fly into Singapore so we could see each other for a couple of weeks, and then I'd fly back out again. And so I was literally around the globe. I mean, you almost name a destination and I was there. And I think what was so incredible was not only seeing all these operations, but getting to know culturally people in a different way. Because it's all, when you're on your summer holiday and you hop on a plane and you go somewhere and you sit in a great cafe and that's wonderful. Okay, that's one level of experience. But when you're working alongside people and, day in, day out, and having to understand cultural nuance in a completely different way, and what they go through and how they approach life, it gives you a completely different insight. And so I guess, one of the great passions for me about that is understanding all the differences that we all have, but actually how much commonality we have. Sometimes I would be sitting in Thailand and it would be reminding me of Mexico, or, I'd have these feelings of like, I recognise this. There's this common thread, and I think sometimes the world is about differences, and there's a beauty in that too. But there's something that unites us at such a deep level, and I think for me that was one of the most beautiful things as an adult, because I travelled a lot as a child with my parents, and that was a wonderful experience. But I think this, having to navigate a professional life and see things in a different way was amazing. I mean, the US, for example, I was based in Chicago for quite a while. I went to high school in California in Santa Barbara when my dad was visiting professor there. And then later on, Ross and I opened an Amman resort, which was another completely different chapter again. And we opened a resort on the border of Arizona and Utah, in two red states. And, literally, 2 months into Obama's first term. So it was an incredible eye-opener to just even in one country that we think we have so many similarities with. Well, look, at that time when I was younger, I guess all we'd sort of seen was films and movies. I think we've got a lot more knowledge about, politically how different countries are these days because of all the, media we have access to. But, it was an extraordinary experience, I guess, feeling like you're living in several foreign countries within another Western country that we perceive we have so much in common with. So, all the way through to living through, Asia and, South America and then, later in Europe. So, yeah, it's been an interesting journey. I mean, later on, Ross and I have been living apart for quite a while. So even though, we were travelling across the globe to see each other, it's really nice to live in the same city for a while. And, look, he was absolutely incredible. I mean, I don't know. I mean, of course they're out there, but I don't know how many people are willing to, back your partner and just say, this is such an incredible opportunity. Like, I've got you. Go do this. Go do your thing. I'm here, and I mean, I think to have that trust and support and, knowledge of a person is pretty incredible, particularly at the beginning of a relationship where you probably want to be around a lot to consolidate that. Somehow from the word go, we just had that incredible trust and knowingness with one another. And so, I was, initially living in another city and then, eventually in another country. But, after a few years, we were like, okay, look, it'd be really nice if we saw each other most days. And so we actually joined a beautiful boutique resort company called Aman Resorts. And their corporate office was based in Chicago, and Singapore. And they were heavily based in Asia at that time. There were definitely resorts around the globe. I think there were about 10 of them at the time. And by the time we left, we had sort of opened and been part of, taking it up to a resort size of about 25 resorts, I think, internationally at that moment. I think it might be up to 30 by now. But that was an incredible journey. And we started off in East Bali at Amankila, which was absolutely an incredible time. And, 2 months in, I think, we had the Bali bomb happen. And so we're living in a community where suddenly, I guess the community was facing the biggest tragedy that anyone there had ever experienced. And suddenly we're there having to navigate through that and band together. And what an inspirational group of people they were. I have to say, I learnt so much about being a human being around that group of people. They were so inspiring about how they banded together and supported each other and took people in and really led by human example. And, I can't tell you on every level, how much I learnt as a human being just living in that country. So, that was one of the greatest gifts of my life, I think, getting to live there. We went back recently, actually, for the first time with our daughter last year, and it was actually the 20th anniversary of us starting there as general managers, and taking our daughter there was such an incredible moment. And virtually the entire team are still there 20 years on, and so if they weren't there, they came in and visited us. It was just absolutely extraordinary just being around, everybody again. And, I can't tell you how much love was in the room. It was so beautiful. But, having that opportunity to take her back and give her an insight as to these really pivotal parts of our life and all these people around the world that have contributed to our point of view, how we feel and think, how we are as human beings, how we operate. Like, I can't point to one thing and say, oh, this one thing was the pivotal moment. Like, it has just been layer upon layer upon layer of working with extraordinary people and, in different countries with different points of view that have gently reframed how I perceive every aspect of life, I think, honestly, and have really sort of informed my value system, I think, even more deeply. Yeah, it's been a beautiful journey with that. But we worked for them for a very long time, and during I guess a key expansion moment, because we did have this sort of, I in particular had a key sort of corporate hotel background, having worked in Hyatt, where I was dealing with, small hotels and 1,000-room hotels and everything in between. But had managed an unmanned resort, so had the sensibility of that intimate boutique resort sort of experience. Adrian Zacher, the chairman, who I believe has just turned 90 this year, about a month ago, he asked us to go back over to Singapore to really spearhead how this development program and this expansion was going to happen, because they wanted to work out how to, I guess, operate in a very professional way but not lose that sense of intimacy and connection, and that very individual experience. They didn't want to become corporatized, so how could they do both? So it sort of turned into a much more professional operation. So that was a really interesting experience working in the corporate office alongside Adrian Zacher and the executive directors. I mean, there was incredible knowledge in the room, and I ended up going in and heading up the sales division and opening offices around the world for that, which was quite out of my wheelhouse at that time, I have to say. And I felt like every single experience that I had with unmanned resorts was this extraordinary challenge, and we were given these gifts of just, I don't know, going off and doing it. Like, it was like there was this enormous trust of, well, we believe in you, so just go and do it. There was no, manual or rule book. I mean, at one point we were sent over to live in Sufta, which is about 20 minutes south of Dubrovnik in Croatia, to open a resort there. And literally, we just moved there with a couple of bags and, 2 cats and a dog, and just turned up and off we went. It wasn't like we had this big crew there ready to go. And we were starting a development from scratch in the middle of nowhere. I think I'm now a tax law specialist in Croatia through my experience there. And, it's just like these crazy, wonderful things that we were dealing with that you're just thinking, how are we here? I mean, a year later, or a year after we returned back to Australia for a little bit, and Adrian Zacher, got on the phone and said, look, we need you to move back to Montenegro, like now, because we've got this lease on this incredible resort called Sveti Stefan, which is a 15th century village in Montenegro that was converted by Tito into a hotel in the 1950s. And it was a living, breathing island, and connected by a causeway that was underwater at high tide, and then you could walk across at low tide. And so he actually built a new village on the mainland and moved all the residents off and converted it into a little hotel. So this was basically a medieval village, like a real village that was converted into somewhere that you could go and live. And so unmanned resorts were taking this over and developing this, and there was about 2 kilometres of coastline, including a private beach in Europe, can you believe, called Queen's Beach, and another what had been the summer residence of Queen Maria Karađorđević, who was the Queen of Yugoslavia. She used to go there in the 1920s for her summer holidays, and so that was the first sort of phase of getting that open. And he was like, look, we're a month away basically. If we don't get this open, we're going to lose our lease, and then it's all over. So can you get on a plane So we literally just closed the door to our house, went to get on a plane and get over there. We had to take our dog back, and we're thinking, well, how are we going to do this? And, I was like, look, I can't work out how to fly him into Montenegro, but we used to live in Croatia. So I called up the airport in Croatia, in Croatia, in Croatia, but in Dubrovnik, and said, okay, look, I'm Sunny. I don't know if you remember me, but I've got this beagle, and we moved there, and then we had to move out, and they're like, oh, Sunčica, yes, beagle, we know the beagle. Don't worry, just get on a plane and come in. Don't worry about the paperwork. We know who you are. And I was like, wow, this is the power of relationships. Like, it took me 100 pieces of paperwork to get him out of the country. We had to do blood spinning in Slovenia. We had to have documents translated. We had to have all these people come and assess things. But because we'd been there and we had this relationship, they're like, oh, we know who you are. Just fly in. So literally we get on a plane 48 hours later, lock up our house, sell our boat. Like, we had a little tender boat because we were living offshore at Pittwater. Turn up with the dog. They let us in, and then we just drive across the border because, between Croatia and Montenegro, they don't have any sort of restrictions with moving animals around. And I'm like, how have we done this in a 48-hour period and just turn up? And, within 2 weeks, we get the first phase of the resort open. And, we're sitting there at one point in a meeting going, how are we, a bunch of, Australians, sitting here opening one of the most historic buildings in Europe? Like, this is one of the most landmark openings. How is this even happening? And I think part of this was, Adrian Zucker used to just build relationship with people and say, okay, look, I trust you. I trust that we're aligned. I trust we have this aligned vision, and I see something that I connect in you. So go forth and do it. And so we'd just be given these incredible, projects to do that it seemed ludicrous. Like, you just think, how do we have the qualifications to do this? Like, there never seemed to be a CV that could have really demonstrated that you had the right to even give something like that a go. But somehow we had these people behind us that were like, we trust you, go do it. You know what to do. And if not, you'll work it out. So, yeah. And, to this day, I still keep in weekly contact with my Montenegrin friends. We're going to make a trip over to Europe later in this year, and they're all going to fly in and visit us. And, I feel like life has sort of given this gift of all these crazy, wonderful, unexpected adventures, and we've just gone, yes, let's do it. We moved countries quite a few times where we'd never even stepped foot in that country, and we just packed our bags with the trust that, oh, well, this will be an adventure, let's just do this. So yeah, it's been an exciting one.
What was it like coming back to Australia? And, tell us about that decision and what it was like returning to Sydney to create the Bridge Room.
Well, I think by the time we had a little sojourn back, I'm going to say we had a year back, about 2 years prior to moving back permanently. We did have a year back home, and it was really lovely. And I think the driving force for that at the time was, really missing family, I think, at that time. So we came back, but honestly, I'm going to say neither of us were quite ready. And that, I think when, Adrian called and said, look, can you just get on a plane and do this? We were quite excited. I think we were like, oh, yes, the blood got pumping again. And we got on a plane and we did that. And that was, what we needed, I think, at that time. And then we moved over to the US. And after that to open a Mangiri. And I think after sort of spending time there, look, we were in, a lot of our postings were very remote, and this was no different. We were living on the border of Arizona and Utah. Our nearest town was, 10,000 people, with 10 churches and 10 drive-through, takeaway joints. And Walmart for groceries. So, it was pretty middle of nowhere. with no food culture, and it was geographically incredible, with Bryce and Zion and Glen Canyon Dam and Colorado River. It was incredible. But I think we were living there, and because we were in the middle of nowhere, trying to open this resort, we came into a situation where there wasn't a lot of skill level, particularly in the kitchen. And so actually Ross jumped back into the kitchen at that time because he'd ended up morphing into a development role and was developing and designing and, different resorts around the world for Adrian Zucker, and, coming up with a lot of conceptuals, and, would fly in and work out what produce was there and what you would want to eat when you were there, both locally, but, what else would you want to experience when you were there? And I think when we moved to this part of the US, it became immediately obvious that Ross was going to have to get back in the kitchen because he really needed to start from scratch. I mean, it was a situation where, he'd say, go and get a carton of eggs, and they would be looking for what we would perceive as a milk carton with pre-cracked eggs in a, liquefied. That was where things were at that time. So he was like, oh, wow, I come in, I have to teach you what an egg looks like and how to crack it into a fry pan. Like it was literally starting from the beginning. So he jumped back into the kitchen, and I think for him it was just suddenly, again, this love affair was relaunched for him, and he was like, oh, this is, he was so happy. He was like, this is where I want to be and what I want to be doing. And, it had always been his dream to open his own restaurant, but this really reignited that for him. And so pretty much once we'd gotten the resort open and landed and things were sort of running swimmingly, we were like, okay, we really need to go back and do this. And Ross had been talking about this for a long time. So I just said, look, okay, let's go back to Australia. Let's do this. I'm a hotelier, but I'll get you open. Like, we'll go back, we'll set something up, I'll get you open, and then I'll go back to being in hotel world. That was sort of the plan. So we moved back to Australia, and I think one of the things during that time is we really realised we were missing so deeply the multiculturalism of Australia. I think from, the food scene in Australia and the produce and it's so exciting, and there's so many different layers, and I think we were really, really missing that. So I think the first time we came back, it was purely about feeling homesick in the family, but the second time when we moved back, and subsequently it's been a permanent move, there were a lot of other things driving it. I think we realised where we were living, we had a very different value system. Our value system for the first time probably ever was not aligned with the community's value system. It was a really different part of the States for us. And it was really difficult to align ourselves with the point of view of what was going on community-wise. And I think secondly, suddenly being in an environment where there was no market, there was no food. I mean, literally you'd go to Walmart and buy green potatoes. I mean, I think once as an experiment, Ross marked a piece of produce and it was still there months later. It was soul destroying from that perspective. And it was a really, really sort of big eye opener for us. And so we really realised, I guess, how much we appreciate about Australia and how, look, every country has its faults, of course it does, but in general, our experience in Australia had sort of been one of, that was very inclusive and multicultural and accepting, and you could be who you were. And again, I know there's a laundry list of examples that would, show people having experiences other than that. I get that and I understand that, and there's lots of room to grow. But in general, I felt that I guess we're a nation that is willing to support each other and back each other. And, there's so much camaraderie, even in our industry as an example, everybody's got each other's backs. Everybody celebrates the wins. And if someone falls over, people go, oh, what the hell? And they throw their arms around you. I mean, I think it's a really incredible community. If we need anything, we just pick up the phone, and people pick up the phone to us all the time. And there's something that's so wonderful about that. And I think when you don't see or experience something else, you take that for granted. You don't realise that isn't just how things are. But actually, I can't tell you how fortunate we are. And look, we had so many incredible experiences around the globe. And so much kindness and so much love and so much collaboration, but also some stuff that you see that you go, wow, this is not aligned with my value system and this is not how I want to spend my time. So I think there were lots of different things that pivoted to that. But so what was beautiful about all of that was that when we got back to Australia, we had this deep sense of appreciation of what was in our front yard all of a sudden. So we weren't taking anything for granted. Everything seemed like a gift to us. Everything was incredible. And, we met Leon Fink and, developed this wonderful relationship with him. And he was like, you know what? Like, I love you kids and I want to do something with you. I want to make this work. I want to see, you do something amazing. And so we sort of forged this incredible partnership with him. And, he just had our back all the time. He's like just this incredible person who was almost like we sort of became an extended part of his family or something, and just wanting to share, we all bring our knowledge to the equation. But, yeah, it was sort of really interesting having that, I guess, experience with him moving back to Australia. But so, Ross had been madly in love with the Bridge Room site for years and years and years and years. He'd had his eye on that site for, forever. And he was talking, the whole time we were living overseas, he would talk about it. And so eventually I was like, look, we've been together a long time. I really need you to do this or shut up about it. Like, really, Ross is an incredible dreamer and an incredible creative. And I'm like, okay, let's just do this. let's do it or don't do it. But, So we were, our vision for Woodcut, the version of that it was in at the time, that was our original plan to open with Leon. And we were looking for a site and a few sites fell over. And then somehow Ross worked out how to get the Bridge Room site. And we approached the tenants at the time and like, look, we're really in love with this and, it's a real kind of passion project for us. And they actually agreed to sell it to us. So instead of opening what would have been the version of Woodcut at that time, it ended up getting funneled into what was the Bridge Room. And, yeah, it was, I guess we just really wanted to... No, I guess it was a, deeply personal project. I think at the time it felt to us that there were a lot of fine dining restaurants. So, fine dining at that time had morphed into, if you were eating in a high-end way, it was a tasting menu or nothing. So it felt like Sydney was dominated by really incredible high-end sort of, three-hatted tasting menu restaurants, and then a lot of very casual restaurants that were incredible. And it didn't feel at that time that there was any, I'm going to say anything, but probably if we go back and research, that's not the case, but let's say a lot in between. That wasn't really a huge genre at that moment. So we wanted to open something that felt like coming home, that you walked in and you felt like you were dining at your best friend's house, that you just felt so relaxed that you would be thrilled to sit in the chair for 5 hours and hang out, that it wasn't like a Churnham and Burnham, like go in and have your meal and then run out, but rather, that you could pop in and, have something simple and then head out, or you could spend a sort of a whole evening there. And I guess for us, Ross wanted to do his food and the food that he loves and is passionate about, but we wanted the environment to feel really relaxed. So we didn't want anyone to feel that they had to be kind of standing on ceremony to come, that you could be down the road, shopping or going to a meeting and then go, why don't we just pop into the bridge room? That it could be a spontaneous, relaxed experience. And so I think, that was an interesting one, because somehow over time, I think because it became quite beloved, and I think because, Ross has an extraordinary talent in the kitchen, somehow things evolved, not necessarily by our design, but perhaps because of circumstance, morphed into then a much more fine dining version of what it is. But that was not our intent. Our intent was deliberately to not do that. If we'd wanted to, open a super fine dining place, we could have done that. But it just wasn't the goal. We really wanted to have something that was different. We didn't want people to have to turn up and do a tasting menu. And we fought against that for ages, to the point where this sounds ridiculous, but when we accidentally got 3 hats, such a ridiculous statement, I realised, we were like, wow, well, what do we do with this? We're honoured and we're grateful, and we're, it's a huge compliment, except for the fact that we haven't created a 3-hat restaurant. So what do we do with this now? So, we were given 3 hats because it was beloved, but it wasn't because we were following the format, because we weren't. We didn't have a tasting menu. We didn't have a 300-page wine list. We didn't have all the things that at that moment in time said that that's what it was supposed to be. And, look, things have, evolved over time, obviously. But at that moment in time, there was a really it felt like a strict checklist of what it should look like. So, suddenly we had guests coming and they're like, what do you mean it's a la carte? We're like, well, yeah, and they're like, well, where's my tasting menu? Because I'm going down the 3-hat list and we're here now. And so what do we do with this? So it was a very interesting time, because I guess up until that time we were like, well, let's build what we love and people will come that relate to that. We were really making something that we wanted to dine in. And it was the first time, and of course we listened to people, we were, talking to people all the time. And as you know, Ross is very personable and loves to speak to guests and is very present and, gets so much joy out of, bantering with guests. And, suddenly someone would be, entertaining someone from Singapore, and he's like, we used to live in Singapore. I'm going to cook you a 7-course, tasting menu from my highlights from Singapore. And they would be like, oh, wow, this is incredible. He would do all this stuff on the fly, which was really fun. And I think it was this sort of, very organic. But suddenly, people were turning up with expectations of, okay, I need my tasting menu. So we had to work out how to respond to that, because this, again, accidental situation, which we hadn't cultivated. If we were going to do that, we would have picked a different venue. With, a few different trappings. At one point we were running a full tasting menu and full a la carte out of a 20 square metre kitchen. Can you imagine? I still don't even know how Ross did it. He's an absolute magician. But we were trying to work out how to talk to the people who were looking in the guide and going down the list and coming and going, well, this is what we demand of you. But we're like, look, we refuse to alienate the people who are our regular guests. 50% of the room every day was regulars. We really had this incredible following, and even people flying in from other cities, they really backed us and supported us. We're like, well, we're not turning our backs on them just because suddenly this has happened. So what do we do with this? So we forced this situation upon ourselves, which was operationally extraordinarily challenging, because we just weren't willing to give up our regular guests. That just wasn't an option for us, because it's so much more than just a clientele for us. And anyway, so that was a very, very interesting one, I have to say.
well, these days, as we mentioned at the top of the show, you have Woodcut restaurant, and Bridge Room had such a profound impact on Sydney. It was the restaurant that Sydney didn't know it needed until it arrived. Tell us about Woodcut though, and what do you love about what you've created there with Ross Lusted?
I love everything about this restaurant. It really is my happy place. And, everything from this very genuine group of people that I work with that absolutely love hospitality, like in a true sense. It's not, I mean, of course it is literally a job for them, but it really is a passion for them. And there's this real sense of, integrity and authenticity and, this group of people that really love each other but love what they do and really believe in what they do. And I think for me, being around a group of people like that is really important and quite impactful for me. Woodcut itself, is based on a series of beautiful open kitchens, and each one of those kitchens has a series of cooking methods. And for us, part of, I guess, the pivotal aspect of this dining experience is to actually be able to experience all the different cooking methods. So our steam kitchen is centred around these 3 steam kettles, which we brought over from the States. Another sort of, little side story for us, but, when Ross and I were living in the States and had to get our US visa, they actually allowed us to pop up to Canada rather than flying back to Australia, which was very nice of them. And when it actually, came through, we went and had an incredible lunch at this little local place in Vancouver called Rodney's Oyster House, and I had these steam kettles. We'd never seen them before, and we were absolutely mesmerised. And the whole theatre of that and watching that and the intensity of that was so exciting to us. It never sort of left Ross's thoughts. He was talking about these for years afterwards. So we're actually the first country in the world to import these, to the point where we had to even do some special conversion for them because they actually operate off town steam, and we don't have town steam in Australia. So we had to do this conversion here, which they were very dubious about. They're like, how are you going to do that? But we're like, no, we'll work it out. So the steam kitchen is centred around, this and the whole theatre of that. So sitting at the counter, all of the kitchens are actually sunken down so that when you sit at the counter, you actually sit at chair height rather than perched up on a stool. And so you can watch sort of the whole action of the chefs. And that particular kitchen, of course, had to have a robata grill in there because, as Ross had a deep passion for robata grills. I think after we opened the Bridge Room, every second restaurant in Australia suddenly had a robata grill. So Ross could not give up his robata grill, and wood oven, which we couldn't fit into the Bridge Room, so he had to give that up. But so finally he got his wood oven at Woodcut. So that restaurant's all about that, and the fire kitchen is all about the wood grills. So that's pretty exciting there. And then we have another kitchen which is the seafood counter, and that's all about cold seafood and seafood platters and things like that, and an open pastry kitchen. And I think for us, eating is about, and dining out, I think for us very much is about entertainment and having fun and, that whole sort of feeling good, walking in and feeling like, the person that's looking after you, like they're really connecting with you and they care that you're there. It's not sort of a transactional type of experience, that's super important to us. All the way through to, watching all the chefs do what they do. It's quite sort of, I can just sit there for hours and be mesmerised watching them glide through the kitchens. And they're all on headphones, so there's no shouting across kitchens, because you can imagine coordinating. We've got 50 chefs, so we probably have about 20 odd chefs on at any given time. So I think there's about 53 chefs on the team. And so it's a huge operation, and they've got to coordinate between kitchens. So wherever you sit, so if you're sitting in the dining room or on the terrace or in a private room, or if you choose to sit at one of the counters, you can still order from the menu is comprised of things from all of those different cooking methods and all of the different kitchens. So where you sit is just really sort of, prescribing what view you're looking at. But, you can certainly experience everything from the whole restaurant wherever you dine. But I think all of those different elements coming in just make for such an exciting experience. And, our restaurant is well, this sounds like lip service because I think it is something that so many people say, but it really is all about the produce. Like, it really is about the simplicity of the produce really singing. I think the Bridge Room was much more heavily about technique. Of course, the produce has always been a driver for us at every single point. And I think, as we touched on earlier on, my backyard garden was always, let's go and, pick those peas and have them, very simply with a bit of mint and some butter on top, or, like just tasting the beauty of that produce and letting that shine through. So, Ross is really focused in this venue on really letting the most incredible produce shine and, and experiencing that. So when he gets the produce, he says, well, what cooking method is going to make this produce at this moment sing? What is it that is going to make it shine? And that's been the driving force of that. The creative process at the Bridge Room was so deeply different for him. And this has been, I guess, a really beautiful evolution for him where he can have so much fun and have this freedom to let different elements shine. We've lived all over the world, and I think every single place that we lived had its own food culture. But also, one of the things I touched on earlier on today was about this shared experience. And, every single country has this experience with fire, and every single country has its experience with, different elements of produce. And what we found, I guess, was that as we were traveling, these different food moments for us is about, I guess, which has created this bank of memories for us about when we think about these countries, those different elements. So that was a really important starting point for Ross in this moment, was how to create those food memories from what it is that we're doing. And, sometimes we have, people sitting there and they're suddenly taken back to, mama's cooking something or other, and they get a bit misty and they tell us about it. And, I think it's, that's everything for us, because sometimes, I don't know, I think it lets people choose their own adventure and their own experience in a way. And yeah, I really love that. But I think, Woodcut is a place where people can experience it in really, really different ways. You can come by yourself and sit at the counter, or come for your first date and not be nervous that you're not going to have anything to say, all the way through to catching up with friends, to, having, the chef's table and having a big kind of event there, through to sitting on the terrace and just watching the boats go past all night. And, for me personally, I guess my favourite spot is always at the counter. I just love watching the action in the kitchen. It never gets old for me. So any chance I get, I engineer to sit myself on the counter. That's always my favourite spot. And it's my happy place.
Well, Sunny, it's incredible what you continue to create for the culinary landscape, and I feel like we could talk for hours, so we might have to catch up again later in the year. Please keep in touch, and we'll catch up again soon.
Well, so lovely to catch up. Thanks, Anthony.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast, or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.